when you're the one who holds it all? When did I forget that you've always been the king of the world?
Welcome back to Organizing and Managing Web Projects chapter. In this chapter, we will discuss the central version control system. We will mainly discuss this version control system called GitHub that's widely used by developers. Now, we will demystify what's happening here in the background. We will focus on its command line to be able for us to work on any command line on any GUI. So if you're not aware, guys, command line is better to learn at first when you're starting to learn full stack development uh, because it allows you to see how commands are being translated to GUI or in the front end. So a lot of commands that's available in the backend or in command line is not yet available in the GUI. So I'll start with that. But basically, I'll start this again with the metaphor to easily understand this. So imagine this as a central kitchen notebook where every chef writes down what ingredients they use, how they prepare the dishes, and any updates to the menu. All chefs share and depend on this notebook. And summary of this chapter, uh, a central repository, shared recipe book in the kitchen, synchronization, all chefs follow the latest recipe, logs or commit notes on who changed which recipe and why, history, flip back to older versions of recipes, Git, modern kitchen toolkit with snapshots, staging area, plating before serving, branches, test kitchen for new dishes, pull or push, sharing update recipes with the head chef. So let's start. So here is a classic version control system. So this is not GitHub. It's not the centralized version control system. It's a central version control system. So as you can see, we have a central server which saves all the history. Now, there's a couple of benefits for this. So I'll show you here. First is synchronization of source code in the team. So a version control system also enables you to keep the source code up to date for all developers and to make changes made by one developer visible and accessible to all others if you collaborate with other developers. So I know you guys are full stack developer, but sooner or later you're gonna work with others. So this is how it works. Logging of changes to the source code. Version control systems log changes to the source code over time and store, among other things, who, which developer changed what, which files, and when. Traceable history of the source code, in addition to changes of the files, can be easily tracked because each time you upload changes to the version control system, also called the commit, you must provide a brief description of the changes. So for that, if, for example, a new pasta sauce doesn't taste right, chefs can look back at previous version and return to the last good one. So that's the advantage of traceable history. For logging of changes, every time a change uh, in recipe, they sign their name, write the date, and explain the changes. Like added more basil for flavor. These log help trace who made what change and when. Just commit logs in a version control system. So, synchronization of code. In a kitchen, all chef needs to follow the latest version of a recipe. If Chef Anna tweaks the pasta uh, recipe, Chef Ben will need to use the updated instruction. Central version control system keeps everyone in sync. So those are the benefits. So, what are the types of version control system? First, a central version control system or CVCS. As a developer, you'll download the files of the corresponding web project to your own computer, edit them, add new files, and then synchronize again with the central server. However, serious disadvantage of this, like what I've said, is that if the server went down, no one will be able to get download the data and push changes on the server. So you're fragile if you only have one repository or only one version control system. So another thing, guys, repository is consists of all the files of a project. So uh, that's what GitHub is all about. Now, in addition, as a developer, you only have a snapshot of the source code on your computer. So, if the server is not available, you cannot go back into the history. The centralized version control system. Each developer in the project has the latest version of the data on their computer, not just the change, but in each case, a complete copy of the entire history. So here, unlike the central version control system, all the developer. So you have a central server, but if it went down, the developer has the copy of all the version, so it can easily be retrieved. So there is no stop in your development process. So if you're working on a project, there is no stop because you have a deadline to meet. If the service and the second advantage of local repositories is that just like the remote repository, they contain a complete version of the source code. So the local repository has a complete version of the source code, which means that you can work offline. Because this server is actually a remote repository, we will discuss that later. But after the developer commit that in its local repository, we will discuss commit as well. It push that to this remote repository. The Git version control system. So you might think that GitHub is the Git, but it's actually different. So Git is an entire source code in itself, an entire application, but and GitHub just use that server to be able to manage repositories of developers. So the Git version control system in git-sem.com is certainly the most widely used decentralized version control system. The main reason for this popularity is probably the Git platform GitHub, which has been acquired by Microsoft. Now, how Git stores data. Most version control systems, both centralized and decentralized, store changes to a source code file as a list of changes compared to the previous version in the form of what are called deltas, starting from the first version of a file. So here is how most version control systems have worked in the past. So it stored delta of the recent of only the recent change on the file. It doesn't store the entire history, which has its disadvantages because if the source code or the server was deleted, then you don't have a copy of the entire history. So that's how most version control systems have worked in the past. Git, on the other hand, saves the complete state of all files of the repository with every commit. In other words, Git makes a complete image of the entire repository or every commit. For files that have not changed, Git simply creates shortcut. So what that means is that unlike the central version control system that has this structure, Git basically have a copy of all the files in each computer. Now, If nothing changes here, Git simply copy the previous repository on that new version. So let's say this coder changed something on their end, then and this coder did not change anything. This version will will not change, and this version will change, and it needs to push it to this remote repository. And then this, since this first coder did not change anything, it still has the copy of the previous version. It will only get the copy of the version which this coder to change if it pull out a new version of the repository. So I'll show you the graph for that. So here's the working directory. The working directory, think about of this as like a visual in Visual Studio Code. Here's an example of this working directory. I'll show you guys how it works. So basically, this is where you edit files here. Let's open a folder. Close. Oh, sorry, guys. Mhm. So your working directory, we've been using Git since forever. Um, Basically, the working directory is here. It's this exact development environment that we're working because here's where you edit your component or your app. So here is your working directory. Whenever you edit here, it is not yet stage or add. So we will discuss that. It's not yet committed in local repository because you might not change anything because you're just trying to work on the file. You're not trying to persist anything yet. So that's a working directory. Here is the graph. Working directory, you're editing the files and preparing a commit. And then you put that in the staging area. Another thing with this is that if you edit a file, so for example, you edit something on your front end, on the front end, and then wants to commit that specific part of the code or this specific file in the front end, then you would commit this specific file only, not the back end. So here, what that means is that you can do that using staging area. So this is the power of staging area. You don't have to commit the front end and the back end. You just need to commit the specific part of the file that you want to push later in your local repository and then after that to remote repository or on the server. So think about this as a kitchen. Uh, Working directory is like where you chop and cook. Staging area, a tray where you place your ingredients before sending them out. So these dishes are ready for the head chef because the head chef is like the central, the remote repository, and the local repository is the chef's personal archive. Here's everything I've done today. So here, this repository provide a look on the changes that you have commit on your repository. So let's say you are offline as a developer, then before and you want to commit the code later in the server, you would do that. You want to do that later in the evening. Let's say you've done your work in the morning, and then you would do that later in the evening. You would see all your achievements or your day's work in repository. So um, that's how it looks. So here is a desktop look of GitHub. So here you are able to pull or merge requests. We will discuss that later. But I don't want you to fix your attention on this GUI, because if you know the command line and how it works in the backend or in just the command line, you would know how this works easily. Then we will discuss how to create a new repository, and then how to clone a repository, because creating a repository is different from cloning a repository. So creating a new repository is like creating a new project. So usually in when you're working in a company, you would clone an existing repository, make changes there on your working directory, and then stage that, and then commit to the local repository, and then move that in the local remote repository. Different areas of Git. Most other version control systems have two areas where files are managed. The local working directory for the data you're currently using as a developer, and the repository for the data that has already been committed. Git, on the other hand, extends this concept with an additional area called the staging area. This area is used to specifically compile changes that you have made to your working copy and want to commit to the repository as part of the next commit. In this way, you can select at your leisure which changes should be part of a commit. Once commits are compiled and committed to the local repository, you can upload the commits to a remote repository. So just like I've said, staging area is like preparing the dish that you have perfected. So you're chopping it in your working directory, and then once it gets staged, it means you have perfected that part of a file or part of the app, and then that would be ready to be committed in local repository on your online repository, and then that would be ready to be pushed on the remote repository. Now, the beauty of that is that you can work on multiple files simultaneously. So you can be a super computer, because it allows you to work on different repository at the same time. So that's the power of that. You might think that why would you stage it first instead of pushing it on the local repository? Well, the reason is local repository could have different repositories. So if you have a stage environment, you can choose part of a file. Let's say you're working in the front end, and then you change something, part of the file there, you put that on the staging area, and then you have change something on the back end, and then you put that in the staging area as well, and those might have different repository, then you would be able to use on to work on different uh, part of the app. And usually uh, it's common, especially today with ChatGPT and these AI tools, you would be working in multiple services or part of the app, because as you scale your app, you have multiple services that it's working on. So you might be tasked in different part of the app simultaneously in a day. So think about that. You'll be making changes on multiple repositories in just one day. Installation. To use Git and communication with a Git server such as GitHub or GitLab, you must first install the appropriate client libraries. So in Linux, depending on the distribution, you can use one of the package managers, Yum or app dash get to the following command for yum. Sudo yum install git. So Linux basically is an operating system that mainly works in command line. I would recommend you dig uh, dig, dig into that technology because it allows you to see the how operating works in command line. It allows you to learn how computer works in its purest form, I would say. So, and also it's a great foundation. I actually personally started with learning Linux first before I created a full stack app because by then I was comfortable working in command line here in NPM. So when you're in Linux, you'll be able to learn how terminal are different. So let's see, we've been creating different terminals. So remember, I'm always creating terminal here, and then I add another terminal, etc. So that's you're gonna learn that in Linux because those terminal provide different environment that will host the entire uh, entire could host entire part of your code such as backend, front end, etc. So for Windows or Mac OS, it's simple. You just need to go to this website git-sem.com/downloads. So after installing Git, the Git command is available on the command line, which you can use to perform various actions in the following section. I'll show you how you can perform the following actions. Now we're on to adding new projects to Git. Add change to files to the staging area, upload changes to a local repository, upload changes to a remote repository, download changes from a remote repository. So here, creating and then cloning. So if we create a new um, directory, here's how it looks like. Example dash project here dot git. Usually this dot git is hidden. So you would usually see that here using view here hidden items. It must be checked for you to be able to see this git because look, if I check that, you the dot git vanish because those are usually hidden. But to create this, you would use this mkdir example dash project, which means create a directory, name example dash project here, and then cd, go to that directory and then git init. So once you enter that command, git automatically create this files config description head. So that mkdir is actually a Linux command, and that cd is actually a Linux command as well. So I would recommend you dig into those concepts. Initialize empty Git repository in example. So that we initialize this command creates the Git directory in the background in the project directory. In our example dash project, this directory is where Git stores all the information related to the repository. For example, the history of the files and directories of the repository, the basic framework. To use a repository that already exists on a Git server, for example, on GitHub, you can clone the corresponding repository to your local machine. So to clone it, just put the HTTPS. So let's say here the React Git. You would when you go here, it's actually a GitHub repo for React. So here, usually you would need that entire URL. I mean, not usually, that's actually the command there. So after that, it will clone the entire repository. Transferring changes to the staging area. Once you have created a local repository, either by initialization or by cloning, you can start making changes to the source code with a clear conscience. For example, you can create new files and additional source code to existing files, remove source code, and so on. So here, working directory, you add to staging area, and then you commit. After that, you commit, and then you would push to repository. So here is the command for push, but we'll go on that later. For this task, use the git add command, entering the files to be transferred in each case, or as in our example, use wildcards to add multiple files or certain type in this case. Note files or changes can be removed from the staging area using the git reset command. So let's say you've changed something here, like here, you will gonna see it, the file that you have changed using this yellow color. So if I control Z, as you can see, that component was changed. But here, let's say you want to reset that change. You add, let's say you add it to Git. One will be replaced by the Git. So if you want to reset this, you just need to hit Git reset. And state changes after reset here. So basically it reset the code that you pushed to the staging area before here. Committing changes to the local repository, use the -m parameter to pass a commit message as meaningful as possible so you can later quickly find changes in the change history. So it's like the chef's personal archive. It needs to have a meaningful message for others to see what change you have done. So, for example, this git commit -m code fix crazy JavaScript bug, and then after that, here's what will happen: master root, for files change, etc. Now we'll go on different states in Git. Untrack or unversion, the file has not yet been added to version control. Modified or edited, the file has been changed since the last commit. So here's the color of modified. It's a little bit yellow orange. Unmodified or unedited, the file has not been modified since the last commit. Stage a change file partially or completely scheduled for the last commit. You can use the git status command to determine the status of individual files. So here an example for that, git status. So there's no $sign here, guys. You just need to put here that git status, just like what I did here. So on branch master, you can see there's a modified styles, main.css in styles directory. And here changes not stage for commit. And then untrack files here, readme.md, and then the script. So those are the file that has not yet been added to version control system. And change not stage for commit, it means it's still on your working directory. It's still not has been added here on the staging area. So here it's a stage, so changes to be committed. If you see this changes to be committed, it means it's stage. a change file partially or completely scheduled for the next commit. But here, it's only modified. So here, the file has changed since last commit, but it's not staged for commit yet. It has not been added to this staging area. So think about that as like you were able to chop and the ingredients, but you haven't really provided it as you haven't perfected the dish yet, so you're not ready to show it on the chef's personal archive that will then be passed to the head chef or the remote repository. Committing changes to the remote repository. If you copy the local repository to your machine by cloning an existing remote repository using git clone, Git is already aware about the remote repository. If, on the other hand, you have initialized a new local repository via git init, Git does not yet know of the existence of the remote repository and you need to set it up first. So if you clone a repository, if you clone this from this to this local repository, Git is not aware. So you need to make sure that if you add a new repository like this, Git is not aware for that. So you need to make sure that Git is aware. So to add a new remote repository to a local repository, use git remote add command, passing two parameters. First, a freely selectable name of the remote repository, which can then be used to address the repository when formulating git commands. In our example, origin, which is virtually the default name. So the default name for remote repository is origin. So if you want to add a remote repository, a new remote repository to your local repository, here you would use this command git remote add origin and this here clean code docker. Now to push commits from the local repository to the remote repository, use the git push command as shown in illustration. Here we push that command. You can pass the name of the remote repository origin example as the first parameter and the development branch called branch from which the commits are to be transferred as the second parameter. So we will discuss this branch later. So here git push origin master. So there is also a nuance on branches, whether let's say some developer wants to, I mean, are working on the fixes of the bugs, and then another branch is working for the new features. So this git push origin master, you can think of this as like chef. Here's my dish for the menu. So here it push this new changes from your local repository, transferring changes from the remote repository. Of course, if you're working with multiple developers in a project, you'll want to download the changes others have uploaded to the remote repository to your own local repository and then directly to the working directory. So to do that, if you're working with other developer, you need to use the pull command. So git pull origin master, and then you're gonna get updated copy of the repository work by other developer. This transfer can be performed using the git pull command, which is given the name of the remote repository and the branch as parameter as shown in illustration. Let's say you want to work on a branch of adding new features. What you would do is use git pull and then the name of the branch. Working in a new branch. So here, working in a new branches is like trying a new special in a side kitchen. Chefs don't change the menu directly. They test new dishes in a step separate station branch. So once the new dish is perfect, it gets merged into the main menu. Sorry for that, guys. So after it, the chef per, perfect it. So imagine the developer like a chef. When their dish or their bugs, fixing bugs or creating features is perfect, it gets merged into the main branch or into the main menu to be served to the customer. Remember the menu, guys, is the plate along with the CSS and the JavaScript code that is served to the customer. Now, how do you work in a new branch? A version control system like Git supports Teamwork. Let's see, this is how we pull, guys. So, and this is the graph for that. So here's the master branch. Let's say here you're working in a bug fix branch. Here is like your working directory. So you haven't pushed that in the master branch yet. So here's how we would work. Here is how we would work. how how do we actually work in this scenario when working with other developers? So we will demystify that. A version control system like Git supports team. Individual team members can each work with their local repositories and synchronize their changes with each other through the central repository. The principle of branches. Branches are development branches through which you can develop new feature or fix bugs independently of the main development branch, also called the master branch. The implementation of new features and also the fixing of bugs should not be performed directly in the main development branch so as not to break the code with unfinished intermediate states. So it should not perform in the menu. Let's say someone have changed the main menu while you're simultaneously working on it. So you did not get the latest version. So it means that you're not in sync with other developers. So that's the beauty of main of this branches. That's the principle of this. The implementation of new feature and also that should not be performed only when a feature has been fully implemented and tested in a feature branch or bug has been fully fixed in a bug fix branch should the associated changes be incorporated into the main development branch. So if you're wondering how do actually developer works, it's this. They are trying to get uh, a bug fix like in a day. So they are pulling out the code on this, and then they're gonna work on that specific part of code. They're gonna test that on this before they push that here. So here is where all your knowledge of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, back-end testing, SQL, because it needs to actually connect with the database and it needs to be secure and make sure that it's not gonna affect the security of the overall system. Make sure you also have to make sure it's not gonna crash the system. So that's the principle of that. So listing existing branch, how do you list existing branch? So here you use git branch. So in the project directory, use git branch. Here in this example, we only have one branch, which is master. So how do we create new branches? So the way we create new branches is here, git branch feature slash node.js dash examples. So we create this, let's say we're creating for a feature. So this is the name of that branch feature slash node.js example. And then after that, there's no return value, which means that nothing happened. It seems like nothing happened, but when you enter git branch again to show the list of existing branch, you will see that you have a feature slash node.js examples, but you're still on the master directory because of this asterisk, or you're still on the master branch. So how do you switch to that master branch? Switching to a branch, git checkout feature slash node.js example. So as you can see, there's a return value for that. Switch to branch feature node.js example, git branch. When we hit git branch again, as you can see, the asterisk is now in the feature slash node.js examples branch. Note, to create a new branch and then go directly to it, you can pass the dash b parameter to the git checkout command. So let's say you want to go there without having to go this trouble of git checkout after you have just created it. Then you would use git checkout dash b and the name of the branch. When you hit branch, you're immediately on that branch. Transferring changes from a branch. For this task, you first need to switch to the main development branch and then use the git merge command as shown in illustration. So here, git checkout master. So what if you want to like transfer this bug fix branch to the master branch? How do you actually put this in the master branch so that it would show to the customer the perfected menu? So the way to do that is here, git checkout master. So since we need to first enter this command, git checkout master, for us to be on the master branch, and then we would merge the feature or the name of the branch. And then as you can see, merge made by the recursive strategy live slash examples, etc. Note, in general, the git merge command is used to merge changes from one branch into another branch. Basically, conflicts can arise called merge conflicts if different developers make different changes to the same code at the same time. However, Git provides various tools for dealing with such conflicts. So basically, what that means is when you switch or transfer a code from branch, you don't usually transfer it to a master branch. Usually you transfer it from another branch, let's say to another developer name created branch, so that because that those part of the code are combined. So let's say both of you, some developer are working bug fix branch and then feature branch, but these two feature is actually is in one branch. So this one branch needs to be separated for this to be work on separately. But after that, you would transfer that to that main. Let's say we have here, uh, just imagine we have here, let's say feature slash bug fix branch. So you would transfer that to that branch. And also, it's common for developers to have conflict merges, which thankfully Git has an option to mitigate. So that's it, guys. We were able to discuss the version control system for organizing web projects. So this is how you work with a team to make sure that you're working on a separate code. So yeah, we're almost done because in the next chapter is the last part, which is um, managing project classic project management tool. So how do actually developers complete a project or complete a website? So it start of course with some systems which Agile provides. So that system allowed us to work on or to provide to provide different tasks to different developers. So it's about managing how do you manage the priorities of a project. So we will discuss that later. But to sum it up, we were able to discuss Git, especially GitHub, and how we can actually work on managing projects there. So we did demystify the complicated. It seems complicated for most people at first, but it's actually not that hard. We just need to learn its basic concepts, such as it's a way for us to track the history of changes of a repository of a project. So again, guys, thank you for watching and thank you for making this far and have a great day. Peace.